So I am speaking from the physical space of New York City. I would like to acknowledge the land on which I currently reside, which historically was that of the Lenape, Canarsie, Rockaway, and Wappinger indigenous peoples. We deliver a land acknowledgement to acknowledge the historical legacy of colonialism by honoring and paying respect to the land, which was taken by conquest, along with the domination of the people who inhabited the land, which was taken by conquest along with the imposition of white supremacy. We do it to raise greater public consciousness of Native sovereignty and cultural rights as a small step toward equitable relationship and reparation. We encourage the participants on today's call to privately acknowledge the land that sustains and supports you. If you do not already know your area's history, we have provided a link in the chat to learn more about the indigenous peoples that live or lived in your area. If you are new to Hunger Free America, HFA is a nonpartisan national nonprofit building the movement to enact the policies and programs needed to end domestic hunger and ensure that all Americans have sufficient access to nutritious food. We do this through both our direct service and advocacy work, both of which we feel strengthen each other. As the AmeriCorps Vista leader who works at HFA, my work centers around the Anti-Hunger Corps Vista program, which aims to address hunger, poverty, and build capacity of partner agencies. Hunger Free America places members in agencies nationwide that address these issues. The AmeriCorps Vista leader, which is me, under the supervision of the Vista project director, supports the coordination of the project and ensures that the Vista members are successful at accomplishing their program goals. The leader is the lead and go-to expert on programs anti-hunger and anti-poverty goals. And we answer questions and provide resources and trainings to assist members in goal completion and overall member support and satisfaction. HFA's work to end hunger is more pressing than ever. According to a report published by HFA in July 2020, the United States is facing the gravest hunger crisis in modern times, with more than 1 in 3 children missing meals or suffering from reduced portion sizes because their families don't have enough money for food. The rate of child hunger is 5 times higher than before the pandemic, and adult hunger is 2.5 times higher. As domestic hunger increases, all types of low-income families are suffering, but data shows that people of color are impacted at higher rates. HFA data shows that in the spring and summer of this year, 41.1% of Black respondent households experienced food insecurity, as did 36.9% of Hispanic respondent households, in contrast to 23.2% of white respondent households. As a global pandemic and demands for racial justice collide, it is more important than ever to uplift MLK's message of justice. For over 2 decades, Hunger Free America has honored Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy by coordinating service events and volunteer actions supporting long-term solutions to hunger. With this year's Serve-a-Thon, our hope is that volunteers will learn something new, take action in the fight against hunger, as well as take away some ideas on how to continue working towards and supporting a more equitable community. As we begin the workshop, I'd like to introduce to some group norms to frame our dialogue. A safe space is a brave space. We are called to create a brave space where we accept the likelihood that we will be uncomfortable when investigating issues of race, privilege, and oppression and our roles within them. Work to recognize your privileges. Use this space to recognize and investigate your privileges. For example, class, gender, sexual orientation, ability. Honor the different experiences we all bring to this space. Take risks. Lean into discomfort. We are all in process. Challenge yourself to contribute, even if it is not perfectly formulated. Also actively listen. Use your energy to listen to what is said before thinking about how to respond. Notice when defensiveness and denial arise. If anyone has any additional norms to add, we welcome them in the chat. I'd like to introduce our co-host, Stephanie Gordon, volunteer manager. This year marks Stephanie's 10th year at the Foodbank SEVA. She started as the volunteer data entry clerk / volunteer assistant after a 20-year career in IT. Candace Weather, the Regional Outreach Coordinator, is coming up on 1 year with the Foodbank of Southeastern Virginia. She is a former educator who now serves on the Community Outreach team as the Regional Outreach Coordinator for the Norfolk and Portsmouth regions. Walter Gray, Volunteer Coordinator, has worked with the Foodbank of Southeastern Virginia and the Eastern Shore for 4 years and works within the community to better understand food insecurities. Zach Neeson, Community Outreach Manager, has been at the Foodbank of Southeastern Virginia and the Eastern Shore for 3 years. He came to the Foodbank SEVA from a food bank in North Carolina. So welcome our hosts for today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I first want to thank Yarna, Shura, and Hunger Free America team for setting up this virtual MLK Day of Service event and allowing the Food Bank of Southeastern Virginia and the Eastern Shore to partner with them. Our hope is that you find our workshop today informative and impactful. Thank you to my colleagues at the Food Bank for helping facilitate today. And we hope that we will inspire you to go out into our community and take a stand against food injustice and food insecurity, and to do your part to eliminate hunger in this country. We'll start with my colleague, Candace Weather from the Food Bank. Candace.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. So, hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you today so that we can do the Racial Wealth Gap learning simulation together. The simulation was co-created by Bread for the World Institute and Network and is an interactive tool to help folks understand racial inequality at the structural level and how it connects to social justice issues like ending hunger and poverty. So some of you may be familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, but if you aren't, it's essentially a set of global goals which include the goals of ending hunger, ending poverty, and ending inequality, all by 2030. If we're going to reach some of those goals in the US, it's important that we look at issues of racial inequality seriously. So I'm grateful for all of you who invested your time and energy to be here today so that we can learn together. So let's get started. So before we start the simulation, I wanted to go through a roadmap of how we will be spending our time here together. So first, I'd like to share that this simulation is the intellectual property of Bread for the World. So we're going to have an opening activity next. Then we will review the scope of hunger and poverty in America, so everyone is on the same page. And then the largest chunk of our time will be spent doing the actual simulation. And then we'll wrap up by having group discussions in breakout rooms and amongst the larger group. So if you use the chat, I just want to know, are you familiar with the racial wealth gap, wealth or income gap? And are you familiar with what racial equity means? You can put this in your own words. I just want to know your level of familiarity. Do you have a paraphrase? Do you kind of know the gist, but maybe you don't know the specifics? Have you even heard of this term ever, either one of these terms? I just would really love to know sort of where all our learning curves are at.
And so far, it looks like we have a mix. We have some people who have a general idea. We have some people who are saying they have no idea, not familiar whatsoever. And a few people who are oscillating between those two extremes.
Wonderful. So it seems like we've got a lot of folks who kind of get the gist but are just ready to learn some more today, which is wonderful. Okay, so What is racial equity? Racial equity, according to Race Forward, a national racial justice organization, is the systematic fair treatment of people of all races that results in equitable opportunities and outcomes for everyone. So in short, it's the condition that would be achieved if one's racial identity no longer predicted the opportunities and barriers that one experiences. And according to the Center for the Study of Social Policy, in terms of hunger, racial equity would be achieved if one's racial identity no longer predicted one's experience of hunger. So racial equity is different from racial inequality. Racial equality refers to having equal access and opportunities, but these do not necessarily result in equal outcomes. Since racial equity includes equal outcomes by definition, we also achieve racial equity by achieving racial equality. To achieve racial equity, we must support policies, practices, attitudes, and actions that produce equitable access, opportunities, treatments, and outcomes for all. So in the figure on the slide, the people with additional barriers received targeted support that resulted in an equitable outcome. So in the same way that we think about racial equity, we need to think about targeted approaches that account for the historical trauma, the 4 forms of racism, and the barriers that disproportionately hurt people of color by race and ethnicity. So this figure is just a great example of the differences between equality and equity. So I will now turn it over to my colleague, Zach Nissen, the Community Outreach Manager.
What's the scope of the issue? Currently, the US has over 41 million Americans who face hunger. And I will add this caveat that this is pre-pandemic numbers. I think we're still sort of feeling out what that'll actually be as we're 10 months into this pandemic. That's 40.6 million people that live below the poverty line, and it's 1 in 8 households. And that's actually down from 1 million a couple years ago. So we were heading in the right direction pre-pandemic in decreasing levels of poverty in America. Communities of color are most likely to face all 3 issues. So when we drill down to the numbers, we see that communities of color are at least 2 times as likely to experience hunger, poverty, or vulnerability of falling into poverty. And when we account for the intersectionality around gender, immigration status, or the status of someone returning from jail or prison, then these rates can climb to as high as 7 times as likely to experience hunger or poverty compared to the general population. But why? If you just take a couple seconds to put it in the chat, just let me know why you think this is. Historical injustice, yep. Institutional racism, policies, systemic, limited resources, great. So those are all reasons that contribute to this, and it's really, it's the racial wealth and income divide. And I'll be handing it off to my colleague, Stephanie Gordon.
Thank you, Zach. So you might be asking yourself, what does wealth have to do with hunger or poverty or even general inequality? The way I like to think of wealth is a buffer to experiencing hunger or poverty. If you have less wealth, then you are more likely to fall below the poverty line. If you were to lose a job or fall sick, for example. And when your income is low and you are experiencing poverty, you are more likely to face hunger. It is that simple. Is it possible to end hunger? We believe so. But to do that, we must target and invest in communities who are most likely to experience hunger and poverty. To invest in communities of color and to do this work both equitably and effectively, we must find solutions that address the root causes of this issue. Why do communities of color face hunger at higher rates? To understand why communities of color face hunger at higher rates, we must first understand the history of the racial wealth and income divide. This is why we are so excited about the simulation, because through the simulation, we can understand this history so that we are better equipped to identify effective and equitable solutions. Today, we are hoping that we all gain a better understanding of the racial wealth, income, and hunger gap so that we can understand why racial equity is important to address structural inequality. Discuss racial equity within our organizations, congregations, and our communities. Incorporate a racial equity lens into our daily work, life, worship, policies, practices, advocacies, etc. And feel more comfortable explaining the importance of applying a racial equity lens when doing work to end hunger, poverty, and working to achieve goals in other issue areas. I will turn it over to my colleague, Walter Gray, volunteer coordinator at the Foodbank. Walter.
Thank you, Stephanie. So for the racial wealth gap learning simulation, I'm going to go over the instructions and expectations from you all. So one thing you all will need is a piece of paper and a pen or pencil. You will be creating categories, and then you will be taking away or adding to those categories as we go through, and it'll make sense in a few minutes. We will separate into two smaller groups by using breakout rooms. Some of the participants will consider themselves to be white participants, and some will consider themselves to be Black participants. If your initials begin with the letters A through M, you will be considered a white participant. So again, if the first letter of your first name begins with either A through M, you'll be considered a white participant for the simulation. If your first initials begin with the letters N through Z, you'll be considered a Black participant for this simulation. So again, if the letters, your first name, begin with N through Z, you'll be a Black participant for the simulation. There will be three types of action cards. There's a money card, there will be a land card, and an opportunity loss card. These are the categories that I referred to earlier that you will be tallying up for the simulation. There will also be 13 policy cards. You will keep track of the cards gained or the cards lost during the simulation on your own sheet of paper. Action cards will be read aloud by either a reading volunteer or one of our facilitators. There will be a slight pause so that everyone can review the actions as they are being carried out virtually on the shared screen. Everyone will gain or lose 1, 2, or all 3 cards in each round. At the end of the round, we're going to count out how many land cards you have, how many money cards you have, and how many opportunity loss cards you have. And then we'll also do a quick debriefing afterwards. So in a few seconds, we're all going to be broken up automatically into our breakout rooms, and we'll go ahead and get started.
or being late would result in the Black family losing their home immediately. Action. White participants, pick up 2 land cards for being able to legally purchase homes at the market rate, and pick up 2 money cards for the equity earned from home ownership. Black participants, pick up 1 land card for signing a contract for a home in hopes of becoming a homeowner one day. Do not pick up any money cards because the contract stripped additional income and wealth from several generations. Also, pick up 1 lost opportunity card because of the higher interest rate and less equity earned once the home was actually purchased.
All right. Jabril, you also volunteered?
Yeah, hey, peace, everybody. Policy number 5, the Social Security Act. This act excluded farm workers and domestic workers who were predominantly Black from receiving old age and unemployment insurance. Although Social Security was meant to help those affected by the Great Depression, and African Americans were twice as likely as the average American family to face hunger during this time. 65% of African Americans were ineligible to receive Social Security. Action. White participants, pick up 1 money card for being able to benefit from unemployment and old age insurance during a very grim time in American history. Black participants, pick up 1 last opportunity card for the inability to benefit from unemployment insurance, even though African Americans are between 2 and 3 times as likely as whites to experience poverty and hunger.
Right. And so Shalinda.
Good afternoon, everyone. Policy number 6, the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. This was enacted to help bolster the economy and get the country out of the Great Depression, but it excluded TIP based on jobs and other jobs. Based on jobs and other jobs.
Base jobs
And other jobs, predominantly held by Black workers, including servers, shoe shiners, domestic workers, and Pullman porters. From this first ever minimum wage legislation, even though the Black unemployment, hunger, and poverty rates were at least twice those of whites during the Great Depression, the very policies meant to alleviate economic strain were withheld from the Black community. White participants, pick up 1 money card for benefiting from the minimum wage to make their families less vulnerable to hunger and poverty. Black participants, pick up 1 lost opportunity card for being stuck in tip-based occupations that did not offer a minimum wage to help families survive during the Great Depression. This made it even harder for them to get back on their feet and build for the future.
That's what that looks like. I had DMC GOUIR also volunteered.
Yeah, good afternoon. This is Dennis.
Oh, hey, Dennis.
Policy number 7, the GI Bill of 1944. This was enacted to help World War II veterans adjust to civilian life by providing low-cost home mortgages, low-interest business loans, tuition assistance, and unemployment insurance. Unfortunately, Black veterans were excluded from many of these benefits. White participants, pick up 2 money cards and 1 land card for the opportunities you receive, such as government guaranteed housing loans, which help to build the American middle class. Black participants, only 1 Black participant picks up a money card representing the few African Americans who had access to some benefits of the GI Bill, all Black participants pick up one lost opportunity card for not being able to benefit from the GI Bill, even though they had fought for the United States in the World War II.
So as you are counting out your cards for this particular policy, I want to reiterate the fact that there is only one out of all those who are acting as Black participants that will pick up a money card. Not every Black participant picks up a money card. Okay, Zach, who's next?
Right, and I saw Terry iPhone also volunteered.
Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Yes.
All right. Policy number 8, overturn of separate but equal opportunity, 1954 to present day. Although the separate but
getting a higher paying job. For Black participants, pick up only one money card to represent the 75% high school graduation rate among high school African American students, compared to 88% among white students. Also pick up one lost opportunity card for the lower student spending that helps funnel many Black students into low-wage work after high school.
So our cards are starting to get a little filled up now. Okay. All right. Taraya, policy number 9.
Policy number 9, subprime loans, 1970s to present day. Starting in the 1970s and continuing today, the private sector issued subprime loans, loans with higher interest rates, to Black families almost exclusively, regardless of a family's income, education, or good credit history. As a result, Blacks continue to unfairly pay more for homes of the same value as their white counterparts. This increases foreclosure rates among Blacks, which also contributes to higher food insecurity levels. White participants pick up 2 land cards and 2 money cards for securing good interest rates on homes. Black participants, Blacks were forced into subprime mortgages as their only option for more than 3 generations. Stripping income and wealth from the Black community, high-income Blacks were 80% more likely to lose their homes than higher-income whites when the housing bubble burst in 2008, and 240,000 Blacks lost their homes. Therefore, Blacks participants pick up only 1 land card and 1 money card.
Okay. Policy number 10, the war on drugs from 1971 to present day. The war on drugs, initiated in 1971 and continuing today, widened the racial wealth gap with policies targeting Black and Brown communities. Although rates of using and selling drugs are comparable across racial lines, Blacks are up to 10 times as likely to be stopped, searched, arrested, prosecuted, convicted, and/or incarcerated for drug violations as whites. Since this means that Black families are up to 10 times as likely to have a family member sent to prison, they are more than 10 times as likely to fall into hunger because of incarceration. So white participants, return 2 money cards for the more than $180 billion in tax money that it costs to maintain mass incarceration today. also pick up one lost opportunity card, since these taxpayer dollars could instead be used to support programs that end hunger and poverty in the United States. Black participants: combined debt and property depreciation increase hunger and poverty rates within the Black community. Return 2 money cards for being more likely to be incarcerated than whites, and owing debts of about $13,000 per household in fees and court costs when a family member is incarcerated. Return 1 land card for the estimated $11 billion in lower property taxes in many African American communities caused by the return of large numbers of people from jail or prison. Okay, William.
Okay, policy number 11, life after incarceration, consequences of the war on drugs, present day. When people are released from jail or prison, they are hoping for a second chance, but they face more than 48,000 separate restrictions known as collateral consequences. Some examples of lifelong penalties include being denied the right to vote in some states, being prohibited from applying to higher paying jobs, being ineligible to participate in social safety net programs such as SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly food stamps, and other restrictions such as being banned from getting a barber's license, Since Blacks are up to 10 times as likely as whites to be stopped, arrested, and sentenced, they are also up to 10 times as likely to face these restrictions. For Black participants, there are 5 times as many Blacks as whites returning home with criminal records. Pick up 2 lost opportunity cards to represent how Black communities are more likely to fall into hunger because so many returnees are unable to reintegrate into society, get a job, and/or access SNAP benefits.
Sorry, I think I went too fast on that one. I apologize. So you should have 2 lost opportunity cards for that one. Okay. All right.
Are to fall into hunger because so many returnees are unable to reintegrate into society, get a job, and/or access SNAP benefits.
And I'll just add, Virginia no longer bans folks with drug charges in the SNAP program. So that's as of July of 2020. All right, I had Albert.
Policy number 12, employment discrimination, present day. Although racial discrimination in the workforce was legally abolished in 1964 with the Civil Rights Act, racial discrimination continues among all educational levels and job sectors. For example, Blacks are twice as likely not to be called back after they complete job applications or interviews. In addition, the gap between the hourly pay of Blacks and whites have grown from $3.55 per hour in 1979 to $6.73 per hour in 2016. Action. White participants pick up 2 money cards for being twice as likely to receive a callback for a job and for earning an average of $14,000 a year more than your Black peers. And Black participants pick up 2 lost opportunity cards for being 2 times less likely to receive a job callback and for earning an average of $14,000 a year less than your white peers. Doing the math shows that racial discrimination in the workforce costs Black workers at least $600,000 over the course of their working years.
All right. And Joseph, final volunteer.
Policy number 13, the voting restrictions, 1890 to the present day. Voting is key to ending hunger. As early as 1890, Blacks faced organized campaigns to prevent them from voting, including biased literacy tests, poll taxes, and lynching. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act passed, making efforts to prevent voting illegal. Today, people are returning from jail or prison who are disproportionately Black are denied the right to vote in many states. In addition, as recently as 2017, states have proposed voter ID laws, which would require voters to have government-issued identification. It is more difficult for African Americans to obtain these. 1 in 4 face barriers compared with 1 in 10 whites. Barriers include, for example, having to pay up to $150 for an acceptable copy of a birth certificate and social security card, travel costs, and time taken off from work. Action. Black participants, pick up 1 lost opportunity card for 1 being prevented from voting in the early 1900s when the votes of Black people might have prevented some of the harmful laws mentioned in this simulation from being enacted. And 2, still facing voting restrictions that disproportionately impact Black communities and weaken efforts to improve policies that end hunger and poverty.
Okay, thank you all for helping us with the simulation, and for my readers, did an awesome job. Hand claps. So how many money cards did everyone end up with? Black participants should have 14 opportunity loss cards, 1 land card, and only 1 participant that is playing as a Black, I should say only 1 Black participant has 1 money card. For white
our initial reactions, please feel free to chime in. Walter, can't really see the chat. So.
India saying it's really impactful to see it this way. We've got a few people who are saying, wow. Some folks who are expressing disgust and depressing. Someone has said that as they would have expected. Eye-opening, educational. How is this not something that's understood on a national level? So it brings up a good question. I mean, there are many things that we don't really talk about, that we don't always feel at liberty to express in larger groups to engage the national conversation.
Yeah, and I think another point is that, like, we're looking at this as a ricochet effect. I don't necessarily know that when we look at policies, we look at the way that they're interconnected. And so I think that when, with policy making and things like that, we sort of look at things as isolated events. We want to fix this problem on its own, and not really recognizing how history is so impactful and how every action has a reaction. And so, I think that's a really wonderful point, that we really should be looking at the ways in which our laws interconnect with each other. So those are really great reactions.
And to piggyback off of that, just how the policies affect people. So we sometimes legislate and put policies in practice that seem to be beneficial for one specific group, one population, but we very seldomly do we talk about the negative implications on the other populations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so in the spirit of, MLK Day, there's the idea that, when you liberate one group of people, you're really liberating everyone. And so recognizing how laws affect the most marginalized of our communities, and recognizing that this simulation is only focusing on the binary of Black and white. So there's so many, other nationalities, cultures, races in between this that, are not represented. And so that would take our wealth gap to be so much more complex, and allow us to really look at the ways in which things are, affecting the marginalized groups in our communities and how we can, help them. So wonderful, wonderful reactions, folks.
Yep. Allison brought up the fact that we have not even considered or talked about the idea of passing wealth from one generation to the next. So with the wealth, the simulation here kind of looks at a family, but if you look at it exponentially as the family, as generations increase and wealth is then passed down, then 13-to-1 is going to be influenced.
Unable to sort of build that generational wealth, that's where those land cards come in, right? That's where those opportunity
Blacks, and I don't think that I ever knew that had such a disproportionate impact of keeping Blacks from at least earning a minimum wage. And so that was pretty telling to me in terms of many of the other trends, which is that these laws, which if had been applied equally, 100 or 50 or 60 years later, we probably would be much further along in establishing equity in America. So the laws were there. It simply was the inequitable application of those laws that have created this wealth gap. And how do I see the racial hunger, income, and wealth gap play out in my home community? I live in the Hampton Roads area, and certainly when I drive through certain areas and see concentrated poverty, and within a mile or 2 miles from those areas of concentrated poverty, seeing fairly affluent neighborhoods, it just cries out, even in a visual sense, to your, and hopefully an appeal to humanity, that in one of the wealthiest countries of the world, that such a visible display of inequities warrants immediate attention. And of course, generationally, we see that hundreds of years later, 50, 60 years, that when you look at the disparity in median net worth of 141,000 to 11,000 of Blacks, that these policies have significantly kept Black people from achieving what we call the American dream, and that's the ability to provide for your family.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And that is a very good point. I see from Anna in the chat, she says the disparity,
change is just like incredible. It's something that, like, for me, I never thought of. And with the generational bit as well, like just understanding that it, rather than what a certain news organization may want to tell you, these people are not, well, not these people, I apologize for that, but Black families are not lazy or, or anything. And rather, they've been disproportionately disadvantaged for hundreds of years and have been repeatedly kept down. And for me, that's an interesting thing to learn.
Thank you, William. And did you participate as a white participant or a Black participant?
A Black participant.
Okay. So that made your experience a little bit more impactful as well. Did anyone else want to share? Walter, was there anything in the chat?
Not about sharing. Some folks are just continuing comments from earlier.
Okay.
Just expressing themselves. And we've got a couple of people who are referencing other sources of information about statistics that have come out today.
Wonderful.
I will just say, I was as a Black person and I was a white participant. It was just interesting just to see like how much I just continued to gain and how much like I benefited from policies that that were created like years and years before I was even put on this earth. And, you know, some of the things I didn't even know about, and I just kind of felt like, oh, this is what like privilege feels like. Because there
it's very interesting how we can see the white suburb against the south of Chicago to be very Black neighborhoods, and then these disparities between the schools and other things for the Black community. How racial is this situation still until today is just awful. I am from Brazil, and over there in Brazil, the disparities between the brown communities and the white communities is the same. And most of the poverty are among Black communities, Black and brown communities. So it's just awful how this still persists in many countries. So in Brazil, the situation is similar to this. It's just, we have to change those things. When we were talking about policy number 13, about the voting restrictions, one of the things that was said about the difficulty of paying a birth certificate. So this is easy. This will be easy to solve. It's just force the Congress and all the states.
So if no one else wants to share, I'll go on to the next question, which is sort of, some people maybe already answered it, but what was something that you learned or you found the most interesting? If anybody else wants to share that.
I can go.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Colleen. Well, my pronouns are kind of in flux right now, so I'm not going to share them in the moment. Jumped out intellectually, I knew intellectually that like formerly incarcerated people face so many freaking barriers, it's ridiculous. But having that number, that concrete number, was just like, it was staggering. And it was not a term that I'd heard before, because I think we do a really great job in our society of not looking at formerly incarcerated people or trying to make them invisible. And so having that direct number was pretty eye-opening for me, just to give it context for something that I already knew.
Thank you, Colleen. Anybody else? Anything you learned or found interesting? Any trends you saw in the simulation?
These policies still in effect, or are they being reformed or whatever? Can anybody share thoughts about this?
Most of these policies are still in effect. Certain states are changing the policies. For example, the state of Virginia, as Zach mentioned, effective just July of last year, July of 2020. Those who are incarcerated are now able to receive SNAP benefits. So some things have changed. Some things are on a state-by-state ruling, but some of these policies, yes, are still in effect. Jonathan, do you have your hand raised to make a comment or a question?
Yes, Stephanie, it actually kind of follows along with that. It was really interesting to me kind of how each of these kind of seem to rely on each other and work together. So for instance, like policy 8, the difference in education of $733 for white students as compared to Black students. And then if you look and how that kind of goes in with policy 10 and African Americans being more likely, 10 times more likely to be arrested than white people, even though drug use rates are the same. I don't understand. I don't think that can be overstated because, those ages of 10 to 22, 23 really set the track of your life. And if that time is spent in incarceration and not receiving fair education, I don't think it not only affects your life and your ability to move forward, but if your time spent from 20 to 30 is incarcerated, it really is hard to get that experience to earn those high-paying jobs, which not only affects your life, but is also going to impact your children's lives and the environment that they grow up in. So just kind of seeing how these policies 8, 9, and 10 that are currently in place and the data that we're seeing today, I know that it said that it was one lost opportunity card for policy 10, but it just seemed like that was just, I know you can't quantify it, but it just seems like a much larger lost opportunity than that.
Absolutely, thank you for that. And Chappelle is also in agreement with you saying that's a very good point. Something not mentioned, I'm reading in the chat, Albert is saying student loan debt also contributes to the gap, which is a major factor. African Americans were less likely to receive scholarships and therefore having to go into a lot of more student debt than their white counterparts. So that is also a factor. Reading some of the things Christine is saying, the layer after layer of policies over many generations that each reinforce and further disparities is striking. Yeah, I've done this now a couple of times. And so the more you do it, the information is less shocking. But the very first time I did it, I was shocked, dismayed, and yes, definitely it was a disheartening, eye-opening experience. I hope that you all have learned something and gathered the same thing. We're going to, I think, move out of our breakout rooms and back to the main room.
All right, I believe we have everybody here. So what we're gonna do next is we're gonna have a couple of follow-up questions. Candace, I believe, will be leading us in the follow-up questions. We'll give everyone a few more seconds just to get their thoughts together. I understand that in both rooms there was a bit of it was a heavy discussion, that some things were talked about, some things came up. And I hope you take a moment to take care of yourselves. Make sure that you are well hydrated. And Candace is going to get started in just a couple seconds.
Thank you, Walter. All right, folks. So that was a wonderful simulation. Thank you everyone for participating and being active and engaging with that and sharing your experience during the simulation and personally. The more that we are able to have conversations like this, the closer we are to change. So what a wonderful day to be able to do this exercise. So just a couple of follow-ups. What did you learn that you did not know before? Feel free to shout out. You can say it in the chat. People will be monitoring the chat as well.
I learned about subprime loans. I didn't know that was a thing.
I learned that 65% of Blacks were ineligible for the Social Security Act of 1935.
In the chat, I didn't know that returning citizens from prison are not eligible for SNAP.
They are in the state of Virginia now, but in a lot of other states, they still are not.
I have to say that all these things were new to me, and I'm shocked.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you everyone for sharing. Anything else in the chat, Walt, or can I keep going?
Give me a second. They are typing faster than I can read.
Because it's so many people, it's like scrolling. That's why that's your job.
I learned about the various policies dating back to the 1800s until the present day that have impacted the Black population and the US and prevented them from accumulating wealth.
Wonderful.
GI Bills being excluded to Blacks, very eye-opening. I also didn't know that Social Security Act of 1935 excluded farm workers and domestic workers, and that 65% of African Americans were ineligible for those benefits.
Excellent. Thank you guys for sharing. So what trends did you see in the simulation? So, you know, as you were experiencing, I'm sure you started to like see those little boxes, the top and the bottom, and you're like, there's a trend, right? Or even in some of those policies, you know, what were some trends that you began to notice as you were experiencing the simulation?
I mean, I saw that anytime a white participant would gain either money or land, Black participants would lose more often than not, more than one opportunity so that they could, you know, strive.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That landmark legislation was held up as an asset to the communities when in fact they disproportionately affected some communities.
Yeah.
The way that exclusion is built into these policies, every policy deliberately excludes Black Americans in some way. And for others, please feel free to chime in. Don't let me dominate the chat.
So most of the trends we're seeing is just sort of like how, you know, the scales are tipped in a particular way to benefit one and not the other for most of these policies, is what I'm hearing, seeing in the chat.
And a few people have mentioned the 13-to-1 ratio.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Candace, I'm seeing Thomas saying we truly have two Americas. I've not heard that before, but I could see that trend.
Yeah. Very profound statement. So how do you see racial wealth and income divides playing out in your own communities? So like when you see the simulation and you're seeing some of the things that you learned from this experience, did any of those things reign true in your own communities? Have you seen any of these things, these realities coming to fruition in your own communities?
It makes it understandable why whites are so fearful. If these policies are reversed, how can they survive when they've had generations of compounded wealth?
Audrey raised her hand. That's a wonderful statement, Walter.
Well, I live in Brooklyn, New York, and especially in the downtown Brooklyn area, when the Barclays Center was being built, immediately the wealth gap was completely different, and Black people and brown people are being pushed out of downtown Brooklyn, and it's starting to trickle into the East Flatbush area that I reside in now, where now you see large condos being built, but the public schools in the area are not being funded correctly, and all of those other things that come with gentrification. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Audrey.
And then to piggyback off of Audrey, we've had several people mention gentrification, school systems not being funded equally, school segregation.
Absolutely. All amazing points, you guys. Colleen, I believe you raised your hand. Did you want to speak?
Yeah, I just wanted to share that in Chicago, it's similar to what Audrey was pointing out and what people have been discussing with gentrification. But Chicago is a city where, you know, it's pretty much a third white, a third Latinx, and a third Black, but it's extremely segregated, and you can really tell where the city is choosing to invest and allocate money, and that is very clearly in the white neighborhoods. And it is an extremely stark difference if you drive from like northern neighborhoods like Lincoln Park down into different places. For in the South Side, you can really tell the difference between where the city decides to invest and where like different wealth is placed. And so it's just like very visually clear with regards to real estate in Chicago. And yeah, there's just racism alive and well and very segregated.
Thank you. I had Tara and then Carrie raise their hands.
Hi, I'm actually calling in from Virginia, and my background's in public health, and I'm an educator. And with COVID and vaccine accessibility, it's really interesting that one of the largest places that offers vaccines is probably in one of the most affluent areas in the Hampton Roads area. And even looking for availabilities as an educator, they're opening up the phases to be vaccinated. I don't live in that city, and I could not find places locally within my area, within, I don't know, maybe like 10 miles to be able to do that. So I think even right now in the midst of this pandemic and looking at equity and racial inequity, how we're definitely seeing that play out with how these vaccines are disseminated and looking at vulnerable communities. So I just wanted to share that. It's definitely apparent for sure.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really great context for our, you know, current world. So thank you so much. And
I must say that this has been very informing and very enlightening. I was not aware that so many of these discriminations are still in place. So I think one of the things that we can take out from this is that it's up to all of us to work for racial equity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Had their hand raised.
I hope I did. I tried my best. They're kind of popping. Carrie, did you speak?
I lost track too. I'm sorry.
There's a lot of you guys.
It was going too fast.
I hope I didn't miss you, Carrie. If so, please interrupt me. So how does this impact your work to end hunger, poverty, or engage in other work in your community?
I can go, I guess. So I'm an AmeriCorps Vista. I work for a university in Connecticut, and my main focus is to obviously end poverty, and we've decided to kind of target low income and first generation families that aren't as knowledgeable about higher education, and therefore, you know, being first gen myself, I know sometimes to be, you know, a lot easier to stay in school and to stay motivated and stay focused if you had family that understands what you're going through and can help out in any way, shape, or form. And so
Right. Nós vamos comer daqui a pouco. Eu tô num call, Valera.
Amanda, could you
Checa como é que tá.
There you go. Keep going.
Okay. So, you know, for me, I can definitely use, I actually went on the Bread for the World website to find that simulation, because I think that it's important for my work to make sure that I kind of stay focused and remember kind of what we're up against when it comes to just this concentration of disadvantage within certain populations. And in our breakout room, we talked about, you know, it's not mentioned in this, but we talked about the student loan debt gap and how that affects definitely Black and Brown communities at the most. And so I don't know, really long-winded response to just basically say like, this is very, very much so relative to or relevant to what I'm working on when it comes to ending poverty, not necessarily hunger, but I guess hunger and poverty kind of go hand in hand.
Thank you. Chappelle?
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about the growing up as a child. And I grew up in a community that was pretty segregated. You had the railroad tracks, and truthfully, it separated where the Black side of town was and the white side of town was. But in that community, it is where the Black lawyers, the Black doctors, the Black teachers all lived, even within the footstep of public housing communities. And so it was a much more cohesive community. And now I see where the Black flight from those neighborhoods has contributed to the downturn of those neighborhoods, and that people don't get to see others who've achieved successes in life. And so personally, taking the opportunity that what I have accomplished, be sure to go back to those communities that are seemingly left behind to ensure that they there's someone there championing them who looks like them and who's been where they have been.
Thank you.
Great, great.
Anika in the chat said that she's going to attempt to hold elected officials accountable. Emma is working specialist in homeless shelters and is going to remind the folks at the top that they are holding the opportunity cards. Someone is asking how they might be able to access the simulation so that way they can showcase it at schools or other people who might need to be a part of this.
Absolutely. So that would be, you'd want to reach out to Bread for the World. This is their simulation. We just adapted it to be virtual, and they now have that virtual version that they are giving out to folks. So I would reach out to Bread for the World Institute to be able to gain the rights to this simulation.
Penny also says, while I acknowledge that Black communities do experience more poverty, I do want to mention that there are many white households in my community that are also in the same place. Zach Neeson has posted in the chat the direct link to the racial wealth gap simulation. All right.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you, folks. And I think this is the last question. What did you learn about the importance of racial equity today? I think there's one more question. after that, there's one more after this one, which is, what did you learn about the importance of racial equity? And I'll add this one also, if you guys want to answer either one of them, which is, how can you incorporate a racial equity lens into your daily work, life, worship, policies, practices, advocacy, etc. And so I know number 6 sort of goes in line with number 4. So I know that I said it in the breakout room, but I didn't say it in the large group because I don't feel like I acknowledged that person's comment that Walter said, because you're absolutely correct. I don't know who said it, but you're absolutely correct that there are folks, white folks, who are experiencing poverty. And this simulation is not to exclude anyone's experience of being in poverty or experiencing hunger, but it is really important to recognize the racial implications of poverty and justice and hunger. And so as we're looking at this, especially today, it's important to understand and to note that liberation for one is liberation for all. And so if we need to, in order for us to really end hunger, we have to recognize the implications of race and how those types of injustices sort of influence the level of poverty in our nation. And so the idea, like we talked about, those sort of those goals, is that by 2030, if we're able to really tackle some of the larger root causes of hunger, which is our goal at the Foodbank of Southeastern Virginia and the Eastern Shore, we're able to really tackle that for all communities by being able to focus on the most marginalized. So thank you so much for that comment. Walter, is there anything else in our chat?
There is a lot, but some of it is being tied to other thoughts.
Okay.
Hard to keep track of everything.
Okay.
So if I understand that the chats are being saved, so let's go back to them if anyone wants to. What I'd like to do now is move on to our virtual event. Thank you, Candace. I enjoyed that. Thank you very much. And Stephanie and Zach, also thank you for what you did in your breakout room. So I'm going to try to talk and do the screen sharing magic all at the same time. So bear with me just a moment. If I do this first. Nope, can't do that. Got to do it this way. There we go. All right, so as I said earlier, my name is Walter Gray. I am the volunteer coordinator here for the Foodbank of Southeastern Virginia and the Eastern Shore. I want to thank Hunger Free America for allowing us the opportunity to partner with them to bring the simulation to you, as well as this virtual volunteer experience. I also want to acknowledge that some of the information that I will be talking about was pulled both from Hunger Free America as well as Feeding America, which is a umbrella organization that many of the food banks in the country are a member of. So what we're going to do today is take what we've learned, the things that we've just experienced, try to unpack some of that, and then try to make it applicable to your own experiences. So I understand that we have folks who are coming to us from across the country. The emails that were sent out to you are very specific to the Food Bank of Southeastern Virginia and our service area. And I wanted to provide that to you to give you a list of options so you know what it is that you'll be looking for and what give you an idea as to what we're going to be doing. So one question that we had is, why does all of this matters? It's estimated that in each individual county throughout our country that between 4 and 30% of the overall population and 2 to 44 of households with children are food insecure. So we've talked about poverty, we've talked about race. We've also acknowledged that there are different populations that are influenced by both poverty and by food insecurity. And it's good to note that the gap, the wealth gap also translates into what is food insecurity. According to the USDA household food insecurity in the United States report, more than 35 million people, oh, and I have to move this screen here. Wow. So I can't read the rest of the screen because of all of the beautiful faces. Look at me jumping all over the place. So hopefully you can read the rest of that point there. That speaks to 35 million people in the United States. So, and this continues with the highest rate of food insecurity. Those in the top 10% of all of the country tend to have poor economic indicators compared to all other counties in the country. So that includes higher rates of unemployment, low home income, which again directly influences how people are able to access food and get to food. So what can you do? So what we have is we have what we call our Foodbank communications ambassadors. They use Twitter, they use Facebook, and they use Instagram, and they also tag us in their informations. So what we're asking that you do is you take up in your specific area, find out about the food bank and the food pantries in your area, try to get information similar to what I provided to you, and then post that on social media. We're gonna take about 15 minutes or so to be able to do that. So you can tag us, Foodbank SEVA, or you can find out what your local food bank is and tag them instead. Before we do that though, what I'd like you to do is take about a minute and a half to watch this video. This is going to talk about the wealth gap that we have in our country and give you a resource to access specifically food insecurity in your area.
Many of us cannot hear what the video is saying.
Oh.
Walter, did you share the sound? Because we can't hear it. You have to share your sound.
Which it's on. So since we can't hear this, which is fine, what we can do though is we can go to www.map.feedingamerica.org. So here you'll be able to access the same map that was displayed in the video. You can search your zip code, your county, and your state and find information about your specific location. Once you get to the map in your area, you can click on the different areas to find statistics that you can then use in any of your social media platforms. So what we're asking everyone to do is to take about 15 minutes to be able to go through that page and try to stay on the Feeding America page. There is a lot of information on the Feeding America network, and I don't want anyone to get bogged down in all of the possible information. So stay on this page. And try to find your location, get some information, and then post some things on social media. And at about 10 minutes to the hour, we'll all come back and be able to discuss and debrief the entire day.
I will add, thank you, Walter. The information that was sent out to all of the participants for today reference the Food Bank of Southeastern Virginia and the Eastern Shore. So those numbers and that information is our service area in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia Beach. I'm sorry, the Hampton Roads area in Virginia. So for those who are local to us here, you could also use those links that was sent out to you earlier. And I believe that has also been put in the chat. The articles and mentioned, yes, it has just now been put in the chat. But we want it to be relevant to your particular city. Food insecurity, food and poverty is a national issue and concern. It is not just an issue that is for our area. So Walter has sent you across the country to get the numbers from your area. Thank you, Walter. Just put the Feeding America link in the chat.
That is already done. And I'm also attempting to populate the video in the chat as well.
Okay, everyone is, I hope, diligently clicking away and posting and being social advocates for the food bank. We're going to need to wrap up. Our time is running out. We certainly cannot answer all of the questions and problems of today right now, but we hope that this is a start. Thank you for being social advocates for the food bank and for those who are food insecure, and understanding how this the racial wealth gap has impacted and affected and has been a major cause to poverty and those who are food insecure. We trust that we have sparked something in you so that you keep going after today. But we certainly thank you for spending MLK Day with us. This was the first virtual MLK Day event that we have hosted. And so we certainly hope that it won't be the last. And I do hope that it was meaningful and impactful, and by all means, worth your while spending a few hours with us here today. Again, thank you to my colleagues, Candace, Zach, and Walter, and thank you for Hunger Free America for partnering with us and giving us this opportunity. Is there there are a lot of things going up in the chat. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you all, and I'm going to turn it back over to Kayla, I believe. This concludes our portion.
Yes, thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you so much to everyone at Food Bank of Southeastern Virginia and the Eastern Shore for partnering with us. We hope again that you found this session impactful. Please complete this brief survey about your experience to help us improve future events like this. And also, thank you for attending. Food Justice is Racial Justice, Racial Wealth Gap Learning Simulation Workshop. If you would like to continue supporting the work of either Food Bank of Southeastern Virginia and the Eastern Shore or HFA, please consider donating by visiting our donation page. And it will be linked in the chat, like the survey and also the donation pages. All right, well, thank you so much, everyone. We hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Happy MLK Day, and continue to serve. And thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you again soon. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Oh, wait, really quickly, Kayla, I don't see the link for the survey and the donation page.
Oh, yes. Okay, so we can re-put that in the chat. I know there's like a lot of things going on in the chat here, so hopefully we'll also, okay, so there's the survey. Thank you so much, Yarna, for that.
Hey, Kayla.
Yes.
It requires special access.
Which, oh, the survey or the
Survey. I'm on a certain email. I don't know.
Okay.
Oh yeah, you do need access.
Okay, you do need access. Okay. Is there any way we can get access to for everyone to take the survey at all?
I will be sending the emails to all the participants with all the links that we posted and also the survey, so you will be able to complete it after the workshop.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we'll be emailing you with all of the information. Thank you again for attending. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.